Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense. It's the podcast where me and John talk about pro wrestling and whether or not it makes sense. A lot of the time, it doesn't. And today is the same as every other day, I suppose, because we got some stuff that doesn't make any sense, and we're going to talk about it in regards to wrestling. And I'm sure it has other applications as well. I don't know. You could probably it's like a metaphor. It fits everything, you know.
Yeah.
Which is I think that works for this topic of today's show, which is people outside of wrestling getting involved in the creative side of wrestling. I find this very, very interesting because a lot of people would assume, looking at pro wrestling from just the pro wrestling standpoint, that's very easy to do. And then, like if you're a pro athlete, you're like, I could wrestle. It's just falling down a lot. And then you get into it. And then you're like, it actually takes a lot of effort and training and cardio and stamina. Like it's a very hard, demanding job. You have to learn timing and you have to learn how to cooperate with your opponent and stuff like this. There's a lot that goes into it. And so people very quickly realize that, either it's for them or it's not for them, And similarly, I feel like working creatively in a wrestling company behind the scenes, as it were, also takes, you need to know your shit, right? Because if you come in from the outside, even if you kind of know what you're talking about, if you're a fan or whatever, if you come from the outside into that world from a production kind of point of view, it's still incredibly jarring. There's still a lot of stuff you probably wouldn't deal with in any other job, right? There's so much to it. It's a good place to learn, but it's also, you need to know what the stuff is going into it, really. For you to get anything out of that job, you need to know a little bit about pro wrestling. Otherwise, it's just you're gonna get lost.
Yeah.
So recently, in the news, the rest of the news, which I assume is the same as regular news. Whenever you turn on BBC News and it's like, there's been a big earthquake. And also, we'll hear about the WWE. Good Lord.
The WWE's earthquake.
There we go. See this? You get jokes on the show as well. He died. That's
Again.
The news. And you're like, come on, man. Oh, yeah. So it's no secret that the WWE have a habit of hiring writers, which in itself is kind of unheard of in wrestling. You have bookers and you have people who work behind the scenes and who put the card together and figure stuff out, but they're producing the show. They're not really writing the show, because back in the day, it wasn't a whole lot of writing that needed to be done. It was just, we just figure out ways for these two people to fight, and then they did it, and then everybody had a good time. But nowadays, it's not just about how to get people to fight. It's about all the other guff. Like, why would we want people to see this guy? And how can we make him entertaining? And what can we do with him that would make him stand out? And yada, yada. Which means that they have developed a system, which I believe originated with Vincent Russo, where they would get people who are kind of outside the business, who are writers, specifically by trade. Except for Russo, I don't know if did he do any writing? He owned a video shop. I don't know if that counts as writing.
No, he used to write for like the WWE magazine, I think it was, as Vic Venom. Yeah. So he had like the fandom going into it, obviously, and I mean some writing experience. I think he specialized in sort of writing fantasy kind of matchups and storylines and things of that nature. So maybe that was something that he was able to parlay into writing the actual, raw script.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll give him a pass for that then. That one, you get a pass on, Vince Russo.
It's the first time he's ever had a pass.
Well, yep, exactly, because we're about to talk about all the times he failed. Because he brought with him, I think he has self-admitted something like this, where he brought more of a car crash TV style to the WWE, WWF at the time, where there was a lot of action, a lot of like goofy, silly things, and you had kind of had to tune in to see what would happen next, and unpredictability and swerves for the sake of swerving. And it became a little more. It's funny because the Attitude Era you think is all like hardcore and cool, but it was quite cartoony, right? There was it got silly sometimes, and they're like, well, just part of the show. And since then, I feel like the WWE have had an insistence on keeping writers around like that to add like a fresh perspective on the show. They know how to do the wrestling part sometimes. But the idea is to have these other guys from outside, but are still in the entertainment field, who can have who can share their experience and try to add a little bit more of the entertainment side to the World Wrestling Entertainment, right? So from that point of view, I get it. It makes sense. I don't have to be happy about it, but I understand why they do that.
Yeah.
And I also understand that because they're looking for the entertainer guys who don't know a lot about wrestling to cover the entertainment side of it. They hire these writers specifically because they don't know anything about wrestling, just so that they can be entertaining, right? That's the hook. But recently, in the wrestling news, which, as we have established, is the same as regular news, there was a recent hire by the WWE to be a writer. Do you have the person's name?
Yes, it's Kenise Mobley.
Okay. So she did an interview with a show, which is weird. I didn't know there were other podcasts on the internet, dude. Did you know this?
Yeah, this is news to me.
What the hell? I didn't know about this. So already red flags are bleeping in my head. But on the show, she basically said that she admitted that she doesn't know anything about the WWE, and that when she got the job, they didn't require her to know anything about the WWE. Now, like I said, I can see why that would make sense, right? But to say that stuff out loud is insane. Like, for her to admit that on record on somebody else's podcast, and we got to find out who this is so we can hunt them down. We are the only podcast in town, baby. But for somebody to admit that on a podcast, on the record, for everybody to hear it, shows an astounding lack of like common sense for the place that you work.
Absolutely.
Like, that blew me away, not the fact that she doesn't know anything about wrestling. Who cares, right? I guarantee you half of the writers, most of the writers, almost all of the writers there don't care about the WWE, right? They don't know anything about it. It's a job to them, and it probably pays pretty well. So long as they can do entertaining shit, that's the hook, right? It's when they're not doing entertaining shit, then you're like, well, you get fired, right? That in itself doesn't necessarily change anything, but the fact that somebody would go out on a podcast and just have so little regard for the company that has just employed you astounds me. You know what I mean? Like, imagine you got to work for Apple. Apple are a very big company.
So I hear.
Well, that's the rumor. And say you've worked in computers, you like computers, and you know what you kind of know what you're talking about, and you have a little interview after you get your new job. You're like, wow, Apple, is this something you're interested in? You're like, fuck no, I don't like Apple products. I like Microsoft products. I hate Apple products. I can fix them, but I hate using them. If you did that on an interview, how quickly do you think Apple would just kick your ass?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect to last very long in that job, I don't think.
Right. And because it's just such a weird way to treat somebody who has just employed you. Who like just employed her, right?
Yeah.
She wasn't there for that long, apparently. And so, like, I don't want to, knock her for not knowing anything about wrestling, because, she's better off not knowing anything about wrestling, to be perfectly honest with you. Have you seen some of the stuff that they put on TV? If some of the stuff they put on TV was her fault, then fair enough, right? But not knowing about the product isn't a big deal. But being that blasé about not knowing the product, you know what I mean?
Well, I would say not knowing the product is a bit of a big deal, because it's like, she said in that interview how there's a guy on the Raw roster called Bobby Ashley, or is it Bobby Lashley? Like, she didn't know, and then she was referring to the Hurt Business, which has been and gone for months and stuff. And it's like, if you were hired to write for The Simpsons and you didn't know who Bart Simpson was, that would not look very good, would it? So this isn't, they must have had some warning signs as soon as they saw this interview, and that was probably before like it blew up on the internet and everyone was talking about it. But yeah, it's baffling how she even got her foot in the door in the first place.
Well, that's it. Like, first of all, that episode of The Simpsons is the one that I have actually written. I don't know if you've read that, but I wrote an episode of The Simpsons where nobody knows who Bart is.
Wow.
Second of all, I feel like her not knowing anything about the product, because like you said, she wasn't there for that long, probably didn't impact her backstage whatsoever. I don't even think that got a chance to do it, because like I said, I feel like a lot of the writers like aren't super into it because they don't have to be, right? They don't have to do that bit. They have to come up with the explosions and all the ink that comes out of people's faces and box-like structures, right? No wrestler is coming up and coming up looking at the box and saying that's a box-like structure right there. But a writer would definitely say that because they're evil people, But what a strange thing to say.
The brazenness of it as well, to go on this podcast and just talk so openly about the fact that she obviously didn't think highly of the job and was just there because she was getting paid more doing that than she was stand-up comedy or whatever. It's like, okay, that's fair enough, but that's not the sort of stuff you should be saying in public and letting people know.
Exactly. Like, it's hardly the first time that somebody totally unqualified for their job has had a job they're unqualified for. But very rarely do those people like blow it for themselves by saying, hey, I don't know dick about this job, but they're paying me, so suck my dick. That doesn't happen that often, right? Most people bluff their way into that job and then think, right, I'm going to shut my mouth until I get paid, That's a very, very interesting way for her to spin that. And hopefully she got a couple of weeks worth of pay out of it. Like, if they were paying her well, hopefully she got it, So this got me thinking about other people that we know about who were outside the wrestling business, who kind of came in from like a production kind of point of view. Because I feel like in the future, way in the future, when we all have talking cars that can fly, which according to Elon Musk is right around the corner, and I don't believe him.
Yeah.
I don't believe him. He has a very untrustworthy face.
Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean?
It just doesn't look natural.
No. Oh, speaking of The Simpsons, have you ever seen the episode of The Simpsons with Elon Musk in it?
I can't say that I have.
Don't. Absolutely the worst episode of The Simpsons I've ever seen.
Oh wow, that's saying
awful.
Something.
It's so they spend the whole episode just simping over Elon Musk. And I'm like, oh, this is creepy. This is just look. He's a genius. He's a fucking idiot. Anyway, put that on the record. And then tomorrow I get fired from my job at Tesla. Oh boy. So I feel like in the future, probably in the not too distant future, if the WWE ever does get sold to a bigger production company or bigger whatever media company, that they'll start to add TV people into the production side of it, because they're going to look at that show and think it's a TV show. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's going to move further and further away from being a wrestling product and more about being just a scripted TV show.
Exactly. It'll just go. They'll start adding stuff into this show because that's what TV executives do, right? And speaking of people who are dangerously overqualified or underqualified for their jobs, like TV executives, there's so many stories you've seen or heard or read about, like, somebody's show is your favorite show, and then some executive sticks his nose in and goes, I don't think the audience is gonna like this, right? It happens with every single TV show. And then when you hear about this stuff, you're like, how are these people in this job? You don't know anything. You know, it's astounding. And so if you know that, then you know that if the WWE was in the hands of these kind of people, like the changes they'd make would be like, if you think it's bad now, it's gonna, if TV executives had their way, it would be even worse.
Yeah.
So, you know, is that a saving grace for the Fiend? I don't know. It's still on thin ice there, buddy. I don't know about the Fiend, who mercifully hasn't really been around a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
Can't imagine why. I like how they healed him and then fucking stopped using him.
Yeah.
It's perfect. He's back, baby, and then he loses to Randy Orton, and you never see him again. Oh boy. So yes, I'm very fearful about what these TV executives might do, because at the end of the day, that's what the downfall of WCW was.
Mm.
You know, WCW was terrible at the end. It was really bad. But like, I feel like at the kind of in like 2001, before they got sold, they were trying to move things in the right direction again.
Mm.
You know, because 2000 was not a good year for them, and it takes time to do that damage control. But again, they had like loyal followers who still watched the show, just not as many as they would have liked. So was it TBS or no? It was Time Warner.
Yes.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Owned WCW again. They bought. What did they buy? Whatever Ted Turner owned.
Well, Time Warner, I think they sort of were bought AOL. So it was like
Yes.
a big conglomerate. And once that deal went through, that's when like the penny pinchers basically decided, or I guess noticed, that WCW was hemorrhaging money, and they kind of figured, hang on, we need to do something about this. So they started cutting all the costs and, trying to find ways of, reducing the amount of money they were spending. But in the end, they were like, nah, we don't want wrestling anymore. So they put it up for sale.
That's what it was. Like, these guys just didn't like wrestling.
Yeah.
That was an old story way back whenever Ted Turner ran the company that he was running. He said, "There's always, as long as I'm the head of this company, there'll always be a place for wrestling on my TV program, my TV network." And then, Ted Turner is out, and in come these executives, and then that's the end of WCW, because they didn't like wrestling, they didn't get it. The viewership coming in wasn't phenomenal, so they were like, "All right, well, we can cut it, save a bunch of fucking money." I mean, ironically, they still had to pay money out to the big guys, so they didn't save a whole lot of money. Still paying Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash, and Goldberg some fucking checks. So they still owed a little bit of money, but a lot of it really was just because the network just didn't want wrestling on their show.
Yeah.
They didn't want to fix it. Like, Eric Bischoff tried to buy it, but he from what I heard, the reason that sale didn't go through was that the network had already canceled the TV shows.
Yeah, so they don't have any TV time or TV network that would be able to show the product. So it was essentially worthless.
Exactly, it was worth nothing, because then they had to do a whole production company number with this already huge roster, and Eric Bischoff couldn't do it. So the WWE snuck in for like a ridiculous amount of money, because they were just buying the tapes. Really, they were really just buying the rights to WCW. They had no intention of buying. Also, they couldn't buy Nitro because Nitro was no longer on the air. So like, these TV executives just came in and essentially, like, people talk about what it was that drove WCW to death. Like, it was the TV guys, because they had no purpose. They had nothing. Who cares if Ric Flair used to be your champion? Who cares if this company used to be prestigious and people used to care about it? We don't care about it now. That's the end of it, and they'll pull the plug. And that WCW had loads of history behind it, and they were like, we don't care, out it goes.
Yeah.
And if you think about that kind of thing happening in the future with the WWF or WWE, I don't think it's outside the realms of possibility for somebody to just look at this and go, I don't care about all this shit. Fucking get rid of it. And then think of the money they'd save, you know?
Mm.
So I feel like that might be a possibility for the future. What do you think?
I mean, it's something that I think feels likely because, like you say, TV execs, they're all about the bottom line, like money and ratings and all that kind of jazz. Whereas Vince and co, they can kind of, they're more, as much as, we talk about ratings and stuff, they can kind of just get lost in the weekly running of WWE and just keep striving to be better. Whereas a TV network or executives might not have that patience.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've seen the huge decline of wrestling ratings over the last 20 odd years, where, back in the glory days of the Monday Night Wars, there was upwards of 10, 12 million viewers watching every Monday night in America. And now Monday Night Raw gets well, not even 2 million viewers, I'm pretty sure. So it's a huge decline we've seen.
Yeah,
And
dude.
you think
Oh,
it's only
sorry.
going to get worse as well.
I agree, man. I don't see it getting any better. And I think that if once the TV execs get in charge, they're just gonna look at it and go, it's not worth their time. Which is kind of like it's I think it's very funny to me that whatever network AEW is on, because I don't know American networks, fucking I guess TNT, but it's gonna be something else soon.
Yeah, TNT at the moment, TBS next year, although they're technically, part of the same
Yeah, it's the same.
broadcasting thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny to me that somebody there took a look at the ratings of AEW and we're like, we're gonna renew this show for what was it, 5 years or whatever?
We talked about this last year. I should remember. I think it was an extra year. So
Okay.
it runs up until 2024, I want to say.
Yeah, but they were like, we like this, we're willing to invest in this product. And if you look at the numbers, like they're, significantly lower than the WWE's, which are already not great for what wrestling used to be. So, that's funny how 20 years ago, Warner were like, nope, ratings are too low. And now, those ratings are half of what the WCW ones were at the time. They were like, yep, sign us up for another. So then again, you're like, well, do these TV executives know anything? I don't know. I don't think so. You brought up a really good point about the TV aspect of professional wrestling and how an executive wouldn't understand that. Because if you have a sitcom, for example, and it's got 20 episodes, you watch the ratings of the sitcom and you just, see what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You see what the ratings for every episode were, and you try, as a TV executive, you probably take notes and figure out whatever algorithms and all that shit and try to figure it out. But there's no real correlation. You just say next season, make us a better season, or you're canceled because one of your episodes dropped below a certain number, whatever, But in wrestling, because it's an episodic TV show that's usually live, that doesn't have a whole lot of pre-production on it. What you have to do is, if there are low ratings for one episode of Raw, the TV executive can't go, oh, you need to increase your ratings next week, because the ratings for one episode are usually based on the week before that.
Yeah.
So if your rating for this week's episode of Monday Night Raw is very low, it's probably because last week you had a really shitty show and people didn't want to tune in for this one. Or they weren't interested by the matches advertised for this show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means that you can build it up again. Like we were saying with WCW, they had a shitty 2000, but by 2001 they were starting to build it back up again. But that doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes time. And because they're restarting and rebooting themselves, they're probably going to have like lower numbers at the beginning because they're trying to start turning things around.
Yeah.
But that's just part of the course. You have to do that because wrestling takes time. You can't just have 4 Hell in a Cells on 4 different days. That's ridiculous. You need to build to this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You would think. So in that case, it would really take 3 months for you to see whether or not your product is improving and whether or not the ratings go along with it, which is a long time. But if a TV executive took a look at these numbers, they'd say, fuck it, we bring back Hulk Hogan, right? They
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
make
yeah.
a quick fix, make these numbers big again. And we've seen that with the WWE.
Mm.
We've seen that where they, like the Hell in a Cell things, they were like, we need the pop ratings, we need to keep the network executives happy.
Yep.
The network executives were bummed out that there weren't enough big shows or big matches on their shows, which is ridiculous because that's, as we know, we've talked about many a time, that's not how pro wrestling works. You're not supposed to put all the cage matches on the free TV, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to build up to the pay-per-view to make that card interesting. The TV is supposed to be episodic, so you get a hold of the picture of the whole story, and then the pay-per-view is the film that ties all those storylines together, right?
Yeah.
That's supposed to be the way it works. That's supposed to be it. Nobody listens anymore. Nobody listens to us, the only podcast in town, and I'm disgusted at this. But TV executives are just going to be like, we need to pop the ratings right now. Have another Raw reunion, have another like, hey, remember this guy from Attitude Era? He's back.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that shit. And that's not how you win long-term, real fans. You just get people, which shows the somewhat superficial nature of ratings. I mean, I think the ratings are important to a degree because they do work as a good representation of not only what's popular now, but as we've just shown, you can compare them with what they used to be 20 years ago, and you can see the decline of wrestling, and it's quite astounding. But if you look at the numbers from like a superficial kind of point of view, they mean nothing,
Yeah, yeah.
because you can get those viewers back doing something else if that's all you're looking for. Whenever really you should be looking for growth and long-term fans that you can hook and you can keep in, and you don't win those people by just having Hulk Hogan turn up. I hate this shit. I'm fed up with these people. I've seen all these people 20 years ago when Hulk Hogan turned up. I was bored of him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is unbelievable how he's still here. 20 years ago, I was sick of Hulk Hogan. It's 20 years later, and there's still Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, but the depressing thing is though, when they keep going back to the nostalgia well, it does, generally speaking, pop the rating. So it kind of pays off for them, which is why they keep doing it. So it's like a never-ending cycle where they're just going to keep bringing these guys back. Like, at a certain point, Hulk Hogan's going to be coming out with like a stroller or whatever, and he's, his bleach blonde hair is like completely white now.
Yeah, he does. They have instead of like a zip line, they have like the stair lift. Oh boy, but that's the thing. I think we could pin this on TV executives because after the Attitude Era, incredibly successful for the WWF in terms of viewership, but not incredibly successful for them in terms of ad revenue and being on friendly terms with the TV companies because they didn't like all the sex and violence, and product companies who were advertising on that space didn't want their products to be shown at the same time as WWF Raw because they didn't want their products associated with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
They lost a ton of money from advertising, although they made a ton of money in merchandise.
Yeah.
And Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was incredibly popular at the time. And then after that, because this has been a common complaint about the WWE for a long time, is that they haven't built any new proper stars. And after the Attitude Era, everything got very PG, as they called it.
Yeah.
There was a period where Brock Lesnar and John Cena, Randy Orton, all those guys came in, and everything was really cool for a little bit, and then they got really PG, right? After that, maybe about 2006, whenever John Cena became the guy.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of that is probably TV executives. They want to make, because what by that point it was was it a publicly traded company by then?
I'm pretty sure it was, yeah.
So then they got stockholders to look after. They've got all these other like things to worry about. And I'm sure that had an influence on the show itself. I feel like a lot of the PG stuff has kind of hindered them from properly building up stars, because the stars that the hardcore fans wanted to see being built up were being built up in a way that wasn't palatable to them. We were like, we want blood and guts, and we didn't really get it by then. So I feel like there was a big period where the WWE themselves had no idea how to push stars whenever they couldn't have blood on TV and they couldn't curse and they couldn't do this or that. And, how do you get these people over while also pandering to the goofy sensibilities that Vince McMahon has always loved, right? Because once it went PG, that shit, he was all over that shit, right?
Yeah.
Goof Central. But I feel like that probably hindered their ability to make a new star. Also, they weren't hiring a whole lot of brilliant people. You know what I mean? Like, there were a couple of guys there, you're like, he could go pretty far, but like for a long time, who was really like the standout guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, CM Punk is like the major name that comes to mind from that
He's the
era.
only one. He's the only one from that entire period. Now, there's a couple of guys you look at and go, you could be pretty good, right? Carlito was around there. You're like, he could be. I don't know if he'd ever be champ. You could do something with him. Mr. Kennedy, you could do something with him. MVP, you could do something with him. But there was nobody there at the time that was really like, fuck yeah, except for Punk. And he went on and did it and became the most entertaining person in that entire run. For a long time, he was just the one to watch, because the rest of the product was a little bit steel. And because of the way Punk is wired, a lot of that you would imagine was him getting himself over in spite of the company, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, because funnily enough, we've just come up on the 10-year anniversary of the Pipe Bomb promo, which obviously was, one of the most talked about promos of the last 20 odd years or whatever. And he didn't have a writer writing that for him. I can guarantee you that. He wrote that himself and delivered it the way he wanted to deliver it. And that's, why we remember it, because it came from a place of, passion and frustration and wanting to do more and be more in WWE, and being fed up of, because at that point he was just basically working with the Nexus and in nothing storyline. So
you didn't like Punk and the Nexus?
Yeah, let's face it, it didn't exactly set the world alight, did it?
No, it was a terrible idea. It was a terrible, terrible idea, because they fudged the Nexus up. That Nexus could have been great, but they fudged it almost immediately because of the backlash over Daniel Bryan choking that guy, which of course was a work and it looked great. And would have worked like at any other point in time, because Daniel Bryan's a pro and he's like, I gotta make this look really good. But because it's like a TV era now, they have to look after these TV executives. That shit doesn't fly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what I think. People are like, Vince McMahon's an idiot. I'm like, I'm sure he is. I'm sure there's definitely some shit in it. Like, not all of his ideas are good. Understandable. But there's more than just Vince McMahon that goes into a TV show. And especially a company as big and as wide and as popular as the WWE, with all their shareholders and all the TV executives and shit. There's way more into it than we just think it is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
For example, whenever ECW was brought back, it was on the Sci-Fi Network.
Yep.
And the guys at the Sci-Fi Network apparently said to Vince McMahon, we want there to be an alien on your ECW show. Because aliens are sci-fi, and there you go.
Makes sense.
It would be a good tie-in for us. It would have fuck all to do with wrestling, but it would be good tie-in for the Sci-Fi channel. And apparently Vince McMahon bargained them down to a zombie, right? So everybody who watched they still talk about that, the ECW zombie, right? Notoriously terrible. Nobody
Yep.
liked it, right? That was Vince McMahon bargaining down to a zombie. That was the best he could do because what were the other options? I still think the werewolf, we had talked about this before. Werewolf, where's the werewolf wrestlers? We need more werewolf wrestlers.
Exactly. Still waiting on one.
Waiting for Shotzi Blackheart to go outside in the full moon.
Finally, yeah.
I think that's the problem. It's like, it's very circumstantial. You have to be outside on a full moon for that. Like, it doesn't really happen that often, does it?
No, I can only really wrestle once a month.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy. Well, it's a work in progress. So, that's just one example of like these TV executives sticking their nose in, and Vince trying to do the best he could with what he had. Right? He had to make them happy, but he also had to make the fans happy. And the fans were already not happy at ECW being brought back because they knew where it was going.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly where it did go. But the zombie didn't help. And again, having the Sandman come in and kill the zombie, that was the best possible scenario. Right?
Yeah.
That's the best use for that. If that's how you're going to do it like that. And that makes sense in wrestling terms, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a wrestling fan, you would look at that and go, yeah, that makes sense. That's what the Sandman does. The zombie shouldn't have been here, right? But if you're a TV executive, you're like, wait, you're going to ambush our new character and hit him over the head with a cane? And we're never going to see him again? And Vince is like, that's right. It'll all make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They wouldn't get the very nuanced point of view that a wrestling fan brings to it. That's just one case. So there's bound to be loads of other cases that we don't even know about where the network executives have put their fucking noses into something and changed things. Like, again, the Hell in a Cells we talked about, where they had one on SmackDown, which was on Fox.
Yeah, I think this is part of the problem was that they decided to do the Roman Reigns versus Rey Mysterio Hell in a Cell on Fox, which kind of wound up NBC, who were like, well, where's our Hell in a Cell then? So then that's kind of what led to them having to do the like unannounced Bobby Lashley versus Xavier Woods Hell in a Cell. And yeah, it's just like, okay, well, way to water Hell in a Cell down even more.
Even more.
I mean, come on, man.
It's not really hell anymore, is it?
It's Heck in a Cell.
Yeah, it's. I don't even know if it is. I mean, I'm super psyched for Xavier Woods. I saw the promo he did. I'm like, Xavier Woods is so good.
Mm-hmm.
God, what a talent, And I'm psyched to see him in a Hell in a Cell against Randy Orton. Like, that seems like. See, that's the thing, man. I feel like right now they're starting to use people right. They're using Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods. I dig it. There's stuff can happen, but they have a habit of screwing it up. So exactly, they have these Hell in a Cells, one on Fox, which is on SmackDown, and then one on Raw, which was, I don't know, some other network. In the course of this, we have named like 70 different fucking American TV networks. But just have 3. We have 5.
That's arguably too many, I'd say. Yeah,
nobody needs Channel 5.
No.
Nobody's ever said, what my favorite one is? Channel 5. It's never. People in the UK, they know what we're talking about. People in America are like, how can you live with only 5 channels? You're like, it's surprisingly easy.
Yeah.
Hey, we had 9 channels because I live in Northern Ireland, really close to the border. So we would get the Irish channels as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which used to be really cool because like BBC used to put The Simpsons on at like a certain time, but then RTE would put The Simpsons on a half hour after, so you could just watch 2 Simpsons in a row. Beautiful.
Yeah, perfect.
I didn't expect us to talk about The Simpsons so much in this.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So yeah, they had another Hell in a Cell, which they had to announce on Raw because they had to quickly do it, and they had to come up with a reason for it. But we all know the reason it was done is because of network executives weren't happy that Fox got one and they didn't get one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we see all these kind of things. Like, we criticize Tony Khan for always putting the gimmick matches the headline of every single AEW Dynamite. But
Yeah.
is that him doing it because he's a mark, or is it because the TV executives want to see action and excitement? Oh, a crazy main event every week. Like, doesn't that seem like the kind of pitch Tony Khan would do to smooth things over with a network executive?
You'd think so. It's got to play some small part in it at least,
Oh
because
yeah, yeah.
it
It's a little from column A, a little from column B, right?
yeah.
I
Because
mean, yeah,
I get the idea of trying to make like a draw main event or whatever, like like a big sort of match that people want to see. But at the same time, having that network interference where they want to see those kind of matches as well, and kind of do something a little different and potentially bring in a new audience, or a lapsed audience or whatever. But yeah, it's not good.
not so good, not good at all. So, but that's kind of what I mean in that it's happened across the board.
Mm.
It's not just a WWE problem, but it could become like a bigger problem because, like we said, if the WWE ever gets bought or sold up to somebody, the chances of a TV executive guy sticking their nose in pretty high. And what's to say that couldn't happen with AEW, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a business. We can all say he'll never sell, dude. He'll sell, right? If the money, like if it ever got to a point where AEW was losing money and somebody else gave him a decent offer, then he'd sell, right? He's a businessman. He's not an idiot.
Yeah.
I'm not condemning him for that. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to business, right? He has a shit ton more money than I do. I would listen to him if he talked business to me. Tony Khan as well is a businessman, and he, now runs a wrestling company. And while he does have some knowledge of wrestling, we've discussed this, is it good that he is the sole man in charge of that company? You know what I mean? Like, from a creative point of view, because is that far removed from a network executive taking a look at it? Say a network executive used to watch Raw 20 years ago and is
Mm.
now in charge of Raw. He's like, I can do this. It's just, ladder matches and stuff like this.
But I would say, to give Tony Khan his credit, he's like a long-term wrestling fan who's been following the wrestling for pretty much as long as he's been alive. So he's probably more comparable to what Vince was, at the start of WWF, and like all the way through like most of the 90s, where he was just like the sole voice in charge and the sole like vision maker of the company. So I'm sure he gets his like support from some of the names he's got around him and everything. You got the executive vice presidents working alongside him, and then you've got guys like Jericho, who's obviously been there, done that, and got the t-shirt. So I'm sure there's people offering their advice, but at the end of the day, having Tony Khan decide all that stuff, it's kind of what Vince was doing way back in the day. So you
right,
know,
but as we've established, is that a good recipe for success? Now you
well,
think about some of the other companies that have done this. Dixie Carter doesn't know
yeah,
nothing about wrestling. No,
mm-hmm,
in that company when she was the head of that, there were plenty of people work backstage as producers, as writers, as bookers, as talent that did know what they were doing.
yes,
Did she listen to them? You
uh,
right?
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, that's the issue. And I'm not knocking Dixie Carter here. And I'm not really knocking Tony Khan either. I'm just saying that Vince McMahon was born into the business.
mm-hmm,
Tony Khan wasn't. Dixie Carter wasn't. Billy Corgan owns the NWA. Now
yeah,
that blows my mind. Billy Corgan is a music singer boy, musician boy, man. Sings the songs, right? He smashes pumpkins.
yep,
And with all the best will in the world, I'm sure, because we know that guy's a lifelong wrestling fan and he does know his shit, right? I guarantee you, if you and me could have a chat with Billy Corgan about wrestling all night long. Although I imagine part of that would be us going, why, what? How have we met Billy Corgan? How has this happened? Holy shit. What the fuck? You know, after that's calmed down, we could talk to him about wrestling and music and stuff. But does that mean he should have the the full say on what happens and what doesn't happen in the NWA? I don't know, because it's still a guy from the outside coming into the, you know what I mean? If I tried to run my own wrestling company, I'd be like, I can run wrestling because I'm a lifelong wrestling fan and I know all the terms. But I still don't, because I'm not a wrestler and I haven't spent time in that world except for when I own my own company. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think
those guys are definitely closer to the mark, not the mark. That sounds like not what I'm trying to see. It's complicated. Wrestling's complicated, but I mean, those guys still know stuff about the business, so they're not coming in totally blind. You know what I mean? Tony Khan, Billy Corgan, they know a lot about stuff. I'm not at all doubting that.
But I don't think, like, being born into the business or not being born into the business should disqualify you from ever being able to, like, run a company and produce a wrestling TV show or whatever. I think, as long as you've got the knowledge for, wrestling in a broad sense, and you kind of respect the business and respect the fans and what they want as well, then I think it's worth you having a shot at running a company, and it's better than bringing in these TV execs who don't have that knowledge or passion or respect, who then are just trying to turn wrestling into something else altogether and get it further away from what it once was. And wrestling, like anything, is obviously going to have to evolve with the times, and it can't stay the same forever. But at the same time, we don't want it kind of being pushed in this crazy direction where it's just completely unrecognizable to what it once was. And I think that's just the big fear of what might happen if Vince ever did decide that he wants to sell up and sell it to NBC or whoever and go and retire in Florida or whatever he's going to do.
You think it'd be Florida? I don't know if he'd go to Florida.
Yeah, I don't know, Mar-a-Lago, and go and shack up with Trump.
You'll be in jail by then. Probably not, man. You can afford his way out of anything. I mean, I suppose that being in the business for many years doesn't necessarily qualify you to be able to run a business either. You know, I wouldn't give Vince Russo control of my business.
You wouldn't?
No, I'm going to put that on the record too. All right. No. Eric Bischoff, he had started working in WCW kind of backstage, and then he kind of got out as an announcer. And then he got into the position where he could run the company. But he ran that company not from a wrestling perspective or point of view. He ran that company with a business point of view. Like if you hear him talk, he always talks about how he ran things from a business perspective, and which is interesting if you look at WCW in the long term as being ran by Eric Bischoff, in that it was successful for a while, and they didn't know how to capitalize on that. It's like if you have a really, like, for example, we'll go back to The Simpsons. They have the Treehouse of Horror episodes every year, and now they do them because it's tradition.
Yeah.
They don't have to be good. They're just there, right?
Yeah.
It's just part of the tradition. Just like Hulk Hogan today. They had something good with Hulk Hogan, and now they don't know how to do it again. So here's Hulk Hogan, right? That was the problem WCW had too. They did the NWO, and then they thought, fuck, I don't know how to do anything. We'll just do it again, right? They couldn't figure out how to run it from a wrestling perspective, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the way it was. Like, Hulk Hogan was the guy in charge for a long time. Standard heel fare. Somebody beats him. Whoever beats him, fucking golden. You can ride that for a little bit, and you just have a new heel beat that guy, etc., etc. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's never the way they did shit. It was all really fucking complicated, and stupid finishes and surprise angles and this and that. You know, that fucking almost like that car crash TV that Russo kind of brought to WWE. It was just it was TV more than it was wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was part of the problem too. And I think that's kind of carried over right now, where it's more of a TV program than it is a wrestling program. And I don't know if that's a good thing. You had said you don't want to see the wrestling world turn into some kind of awful, you know, like in the future it could turn into something terrible. But I'm like, isn't it getting pretty close to that right now? Like if you watch a TV show regarding wrestling, let's say Monday Night Raw, isn't there an awful lot of it which is just more TV than it is wrestling and just hard to watch garbage? And you're like, this isn't what Raw used to be like.
No, I think this is the problem as well with the product nowadays is they like WWE don't really see any other wrestling company as competition and haven't done for a long time, which is what has kind of allowed them to get further away from what wrestling once was. And so now they are producing it more as like a TV show. But then if you start comparing it to like other TV shows, then like not just wrestling shows, it's like, why would I watch this? Why would I watch like a 3-hour episode of something where nothing really makes sense? There's lame jokes and just awful characters, and it just doesn't really make any sense that this is the product they'd put out if they were like of that mindset and trying to be like a proper TV show. It's just, how can you like hire writers and spend all this money producing something like this and it's still being this bad?
Well, yeah, I think that's the trick to bring everything full circle. We were kind of talking about how I don't think it's necessary for the writers to totally understand anything about wrestling, right? Whereas maybe that is what the problem is. Maybe you're totally correct. Maybe they should have some idea of what the product is. Because if you set those guys, all these new writers, you set them up down and make them watch an episode of Raw, make the writers watch an episode of Raw, and then go, all right, what did you like and what didn't you like? This is the show. This is what we got. How do we fix it? Right? Because they're like, if they don't know anything about wrestling, if we can see if they work for the fucking company, see what they like and see if it gets over with the actual audience. You know what I mean? And instead of just, because sometimes it feels like nobody's talking to each other and it's all nonsense. Shit just happens. You're like, well, I guess that's the show today, you know?
Well, I have a feeling as well that it's a yes culture there as well. So they don't want to tell, like, the higher ups and Vince and whatnot that it is bad or whatever, because they don't want to rock the boat or anything. Like, it's probably a pretty sweet gig to be a WWE writer because, I mean, I'm sure it's very stressful because unlike other TV shows where it's, 6 or 10 or, 24 episodes a year, they're doing this like every week, week in, week out. And you're basically at the whims of a 75-year-old madman who never really knows what he wants. So it's got to be a stressful job in that sense. But at the same time, you can just put out any old shit, it seems like, and still get paid lots of money for it. So fair play to him for taking it.
So long as you don't talk about it on any podcast, it's a sweet gig. And of course, the only podcast you could possibly do that on is this podcast. It's the only one that exists. What do you think? Is that a show?
I think that's pretty much a show, yeah.
Anything else you want to say about the incredible world of TV producers or WWE writers?
Just that, if WWE are looking for 2 young, handsome, incredibly talented writers who could obviously help them out a lot and bring back all those ratings, we're probably not them, but still hire us anyway.
Oh yeah, hire us instead of the handsome guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Fuck the handsome guys. We're way better.
Hmm.
Yeah, we'll probably work for less.
I mean, not that
Not too
much
much.
less,
Yeah.
but it definitely, like $10 less or something.
Yeah, it's negotiable. We'll talk numbers off air. Okay, WWE, give us a little call, and we'll talk about this later. Cause we got plans, man. We got really good ideas. What about some kind of box?
Are you sure you're not interested in a box-like structure, maybe?
Yeah, not an actual box, but something like a box. You know
Okay.
what I mean? And then ink. Put the rest of it together. See you guys later. I'm off to the bar. You know, I'm off to my favorite podcast. Wrestling doesn't make sense, so I can talk about this on an interview and then get fired immediately afterwards. What I do.
Sounds perfect.
Exactly, just like this show. All right, I guess that's it then. So that was today's show. It was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for listening. We're gonna be back next week with another episode of Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense. We'll pick something else about pro wrestling and see whether or not it makes sense. It'll be a great time. So make sure you tune in then. Otherwise, you're an idiot and we don't want to talk to you. Let's still listen to the show, please. Okay, cool. Well, then that's it. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.